Welcome on the channel Voices of Reddit. Today we have an intriguing story about the
I have two children with my ex-wife, a son named John, who is 22, and a daughter named Sally, who is 20. I'm a 41-year-old man, and I've remarried to my wife, who is 28. Despite the divorce, I've always been very close with my kids, maintaining our cherished traditions and spending quality time together whenever possible. Recently, John became engaged to his girlfriend, Abby. She's a pleasant young woman, but she tends to be a bit pushy when it comes to integrating herself into our family. Abby isn't close to her own family. She's shared stories about why, and while some of her complaints don't seem severe to me, it's not my place to judge. I wasn't there, so I can't fully understand her experiences. We've tried to be welcoming to Abby, however, she often forces her way into our family traditions, some of which are reserved solely for immediate family members. For instance, she's been calling my daughter, Sally, sis, since she and John had only been dating for a few months. She also has an odd dynamic with my wife, attempting to establish a sisterly or mother-in-law relationship that feels forced and unnatural. The most uncomfortable part for me is that Abby wants me to be like a father to her. This desire doesn't stem from a close bond or a deep connection. We're very different people, and while that's not inherently bad, it means we haven't naturally developed a close relationship yet. She began calling me Dad before she and John were even engaged. One of our family traditions is that when my kids come over, we have a private catch-up session in my office before they leave. This tradition has become even more important since I remarried because, while they get along well with my wife, they're not yet comfortable discussing personal matters around her. Abby once asked if she could join these private talks. After I explained the tradition to her, John later approached me and asked if I could include her, explaining that she'd never had a caring conversation with her own father. Feeling sympathetic, I compromised. While I didn't include her in our long-standing tradition, I agreed to join her and John for coffee and let her talk. It seemed like a reasonable middle ground. However, shortly after, she started calling me Dad. John pulled me aside and begged me to allow it. He told me that I was the kind of father she'd always wanted, that she cried watching me and Sally together, and that it would mean the world to her. I didn't feel comfortable with it, but I felt bad for her situation. So, reluctantly, I allowed her to call me Dad. Things escalated from there. She wants me to walk her down the aisle at their wedding and have the father-daughter dance with her. I don't want to walk her down the aisle, and I walk with a cane. So dancing is difficult for me. At my own wedding, I only danced twice. John is begging me to do at least one of these things, preferably walking her down the aisle. They came over on Sunday, and John and I were talking. I thought it was a good time to address the situation. Abby walked in without knocking and excitedly asked if John had told me yet. When I asked what she was referring to, John said she wanted me to mention in my speech at the wedding that I now have a second daughter and that I love her. I just looked at him, a bit stunned. She then asked if I would be doing the walk and dance for Sally at the wedding. I said, "Of course, Sally is my daughter." Abby then exclaimed, "She's my daughter too." I tried to explain that while I appreciate her feelings, it will never be the same. Sally is my actual daughter. I offered to mention in my speech that she's a happy addition to the family and that I love how happy she makes John. I thought it was a good compromise. But she started crying. John apologized, and they left. Later, he called me, nearly begging me to reconsider. Am I the bad person because I won't lie and say I love her as my daughter? As time went on, the situation became more complicated. On Mother's Day, my kids and their partners went to visit my ex-wife. It turns out that my ex-wife and Abby are much closer than I realized. Abby calls her Mom, and apparently, my ex-wife has been encouraging her to integrate into the family more forcefully. During their visit, Abby was talking about the wedding, and whenever she referred to me, she called me Dad. My son told her to let it go, which led to an argument. Abby insisted that she deserved to be my daughter, and my ex-wife supported her. John tried to explain that while I'm trying to be accommodating, she needs to be realistic. Sally chimed in, saying that I only have one daughter, which was in response to Abby suggesting that as my daughters, they should be united. According to John, Abby was crying. According to Sally, she was crying, yelling, and even kicked something before storming off to her room. Sally told me she had a confrontation with her mother but wouldn't elaborate on what was said. Knowing Sally, I can only imagine it was intense. Around 2 a.m., I received a text from Sally's partner's phone saying, "Abby really is great. She hasn't been perfect, but you should give her a chance, and you will learn to love her." I saw it when I woke up and tried to text back, but I was blocked. I called Sally, but they were driving. They stopped by my place later that day because I am on the way, and my daughter prefers my cooking and company. They told me about the night before. At the end, I asked to speak to Sally's partner alone. I asked if I had done something to upset her. She was confused, and I told her I was blocked. She said I wasn't but checked her phone and realized I was. I told her it was after her message, but she didn't recall sending any message. I showed her the text, which was not on her phone anymore. At that point, we brought in Sally and caught her up. Neither of them was happy. We realized that Abby had sent the message from Sally's partner's phone, then blocked me to prevent any response. A couple of days later, John and Abby dropped by unannounced, which is unusual for our family, but I welcomed them. I had made salmon, which doesn't take long to cook, so I prepared extra for them. Throughout the night, Abby kept bringing up the wedding. John tried to change the subject, but she insisted. We discussed logistics because I was helping them get some good deals through professional contacts. Finally, she blurted out, "So I was talking to Mom. She said that you can walk me down the aisle, and she'll do the dance. Or you can dance, and she'll walk. It's your call, but you need to choose soon." I reiterated that I could not dance due to my physical limitations and did not feel comfortable walking her down the aisle. She got upset and said, "Mom loves me, why can't you?" I felt bad but couldn't lie. I pointed out that she has John who loves her, my ex-wife, and friends, people who genuinely care for her. She replied, "But other than Mom, those aren't my parents." I said, "Neither am I." She became very emotional, so my wife and I gave them a few minutes alone. Later, my son and I were alone, and he looked exhausted. He confessed that after Mother's Day, Abby had called Sally, insisting that they are both my daughters and that I don't get to be close with one but not both. She said it was them against me. Sally, being straightforward, told her that I only have one daughter. Things escalated, and harsh words were exchanged. John had to hang up the call before it got worse, but Abby was shaken. There was a new problem. Abby had convinced herself that I didn't mean what I was saying and that I was just doing it for Sally's sake. He told me he would handle it. However, things did not improve. Abby began sending me text messages every couple of days, acting as if we had a secret relationship that Sally didn't know about. She even called herself my secret daughter and laughed about it. She invited my wife to lunch, saying, 2 out of 3 of his girls going out. She started showing up at family events, like a recent barbecue, and insisted on taking pictures with just me or with my wife and me, but always ensuring there were some with just me. She would post these with captions that made me uncomfortable. My wife was getting annoyed because of how Abby was behaving, especially when she tried to insert herself into our Father's Day plans. She had even surprised my wife with Father's Day plans for me that had to be shut down. My wife is kind-hearted and has a soft spot for Abby, so when Abby gets emotional, she tends to cave in. I asked John if he was upset with me. He said no but wished things were different. He was worried that his relationship with Sally was strained. I took the advice of some friends and suggested premarital counseling. He said he would discuss it with Abby. Meanwhile, Abby was insisting that Sally attend her wedding dress fitting. Sally was not interested and made it clear. We tried to let things calm down. The 6 of us have barely been in the same room since Father's Day, which was supposed to be a pleasant day but turned into a disaster. We are supposed to meet on Friday. Sally's partner and I have a bet going about how bad it will go. In the midst of all this, my wife and I received some wonderful news. She is pregnant. We are thrilled and focusing on keeping her stress-free and pampered. It's such a different experience this time around, both because of how much more involved I can be and the strong relationship I have with my wife. Sally has been great, helping with the nursery and spending time with her stepmother. Even her partner has been supportive. My son has been building a crib for the baby, modeled after the one I built for him and Sally when they were babies. It's his way of showing support and love, and it means a lot to us. However, the situation with Abby continued to escalate. I called a family meeting with my kids to address everything. I told John that Sally would only participate in wedding activities she wanted to and that the guilt trips needed to stop. This was hurting his relationship with his sister. Sally was relieved I said it so she didn't have to again. I also told John that if Abby did not stop messaging me, I would block her and explain bluntly why. We got a lot out in the open, and John seemed to understand. A few days later, they insisted on coming over to talk. Sally and I decided we would get everything out in the open. We all had dinner at our place. Abby immediately started talking about baby shower ideas. I told her that this was the kind of thing we needed to discuss. I explained that while I understood she was trying to fill a void in her life, she needed to respect our boundaries. I offered a fresh start, suggesting that we could build a relationship over time if she agreed to respect our limits. Abby tried to negotiate, saying that since we were starting over, we could define the relationship and just be a family. We told her we were not ready for that and that it needed to happen organically. She got upset that I was closer with Sally's partner, which is true, but that's because we naturally get along. Sally pointed out that perhaps Abby should try doing things we actually enjoy. Abby ran to our bathroom, and John followed her. After a while, I checked on them and heard her saying, "This is not what I wanted." My wife, Sally, and her partner went out to the patio to give them privacy. Later, John told me that they had talked at home and that Abby understood. For a couple of weeks, things seemed to improve. The text stopped, except for occasional wedding questions. She stopped pushing herself on my wife and Sally. We thought she was involving us less in wedding planning out of respect. But then I got a call from the wedding venue, telling me that the card I used to pay for it had been declined. This was a card I use for big purchases, so I knew it had a high limit. That's when I learned they had changed the wedding date by 2 months, despite being informed that they would lose a significant portion of the deposit because it was too close to the original date. I was furious. I may be financially comfortable, but I am not wealthy enough to throw away money like that. I called John and told him he needed to come over immediately. Alone, they both came. When they arrived, Abby started with, "Dad." I responded, "You have got to be kidding me," and walked toward the table. Abby had the nerve to ask where dinner was. I told them that was not why they were here. I hoped my son would be honest with me, so I asked what was going on with the venue. Abby tried to go into wedding details, but John interrupted to explain that they had postponed the wedding because my ex-wife was unavailable due to surgery. He hadn't told me because he was putting together money to cover the lost deposit himself and had just started informing guests of the change. Then Abby said, "We have extra time to work on our dance." My wife had just come home, and I was walking her toward the bedroom when Abby said that. I told her we would discuss it shortly. I settled my wife in and returned to confront them. I lost my temper. I made it clear I was done with this nonsense. Abby looked stunned. I explained, bluntly, how Sally and I felt about her attempts to force us into loving her without taking the time to build a genuine relationship. She started crying and shouted, "Then what was this even for?" John asked what she meant, and she said, "Delaying the wedding." It turned out that postponing the wedding was a ploy. My ex-wife and Abby had decided that if I had more time, I would come around. My ex-wife had told them not to worry about the money because I am loaded. She has always been bitter that I make more money now than I did when we were married. Abby had lied to John about the reason for the postponement. He was distraught, repeating, "You lied to me." As she tried to spin it, she became defensive, blaming my ex-wife and me for being stubborn. She yelled, "Why can't I just call him Dad?" Finally, John snapped and said, "Because he is not your dad." She started crying and said that he had told her she could call me that. He admitted he had told her she might be able to eventually but had repeatedly asked her to slow down. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. I checked on my wife, and when I returned, they were leaving. John came over a few days later and said they had a long talk at home. He even asked her if she would have dated him if there was never a chance of being part of our family. He believed her when she said yes, but she admitted that I was a big draw for her, that I was the kind of dad she always wanted and that my relationship with Sally was what she longed for. This gave John doubts about whether she loved him for himself. I talked to him about marriage counseling, how his mother and I had tried it. While it didn't save our marriage, it provided clarity and an impartial voice. I pointed out that they both like coming to me, but I cannot be impartial, and if they are trying to make it work, they need to do it properly. Abby texted me, asking if I was the one who suggested therapy. I responded, "Does it matter if John wants to?" She asked why it was so bad that she wants to know what I think. I told her that John's opinion should matter most to her. They fought because of the text, but she agreed to counseling, and the wedding has been postponed indefinitely. They are now in therapy, and he says she struggles, but I don't know the details. She has been leaving Sally alone and stopped texting me, except for occasional general questions that sometimes include attempts to delve deeper. My wife occasionally spends time with her because Abby is very interested in her pregnancy, more so than I like. But it's my wife's choice, so that's where we are now. I'm focusing on my wife and our upcoming child, hoping that things will settle down. Am I the bad person for not wanting to walk Abby down the aisle or lie in a speech by saying I love her as a daughter?